everyone. Welcome to the DevCon developer panel this year. Thanks, this is a great turnout. The good news is, right after this, we get to go party next door starting at 6:30. So we'll be spending the next hour with you, giving you an opportunity to ask our esteemed developers up here on stage your technical questions or whatever's on your mind. So a quick introduction to the format. This will be similar to the fireside chat if you went to that last night, meaning we're going to go over the questions that were submitted online on the community forum. We'll give an opportunity for follow-up questions related to the original question. Once we get through those, we actually don't have a whole lot. We'll open up the floor with the two mics up front and we'll alternate left and right to direct your questions and hopefully get them answered. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and leave it to my colleagues on stage to introduce themselves and tell us their role at FileMaker.
Hi, I'm Masao Auto. I'm a QA architect who actually designed how to testing the application. So my role is actually designing the test plan or test strategy for the FileMaker platforms. So that's including the client, server, web direct, and then the cloud. That's my role.
Hello, so my name is Nicolas Guillemin. I'm a QA director working mostly on desktop, but also server and cloud and web direct. I've been working on FileMaker for about 14 years. First, a couple years as a solution developer, and then moved in FileMaker, and I've been working in QA for 12 years now.
Hello, my name is James Quiggins, and I'm the server QA manager. I've been working on FileMaker for, I guess, 7 years now. My first 2 years were actually in support, and I joined the PD team, and since then I went through the QA roles and then became the manager of server about 2 years ago.
Hello, I'm Emmanuel Tangraj, Director, Server and Database Engine Development. I'm a toddler in FileMaker, 2.5 years old, still on the learning curve.
Hi, I'm Melody Shu, and I'm the Web Direct Engineering Manager. And when I started, I was fixing bugs in instant web publishing. I don't know how many of you remember that product. Then I worked on Web Direct before I became the engineering manager.
Hello, I'm the permanent resident of this desk, it seems like now. So, but I'm Clay Mackwell. I've been at Claris since '87 and started working on FileMaker in '89, and I've done a bit of everything on the product. So, I think that's yeah.
Thanks. So as you can tell by their introductions, we have a great variety. We're actually covering all of the FileMaker products on the stage today, and we have an even split between QA and Dev, and they've conveniently coordinated their shirts so you could tell which one's QA on the left and Dev on the right. All right, so with those introductions out of the way, we'll jump into our first question. And the first three are going to revolve around the data migration tool, and we'll start off with Clay, since he's the creator and inventor of that tool. And I wanted to start by asking, does the data migration tool work for all FMP12 files?
So can I get or how many people were at my talk a little bit earlier? Okay, so so most of you heard that answer there, but the quick thing is, yeah, it was mainly tested on like 16 and 17 is where most of the testing, right? Is that correct, Masao?
So the most of the test scenarios that we created from the migrating 16 and then also the 17 that we had, we did it. Also, we included in the testing, a file created in the press 12, formatted to 12, and then we did some migration testing. That's what we did it. And actually, test is designed by some people in the China, and then I think that Nicholas knows that how they manage all the testing.
Yeah, or whatever. Yeah, they heard me talk. I mean, you can tell the testing group and what you guys did.
So
to
there was one question actually afterwards about whether testing had been done with FP7 files. So the answer is yes. So we have a bunch of files over the years that we've been keeping using. So for different purposes, some about record, some about structure. So we've been using those files, converting them to FMP12, and did the migration on them. Now, I wasn't exactly sure if the question was specifically about FP7 or if it was more meant as a file with an old history. If the person who has the question is here, maybe can follow up later. Yeah.
It actually won't open the 7 format, but we have tested doing conversions of these earlier formats of the 7 time frame. We probably don't go back to the files from 86 or anything like that, but we do transfer them probably.
Feel free to, Tony.
What Clay said earlier, and I'll just say it out loud, and maybe you confirm it, is my takeaway from what you said is don't do it with 12. Don't do it trying to go backwards. But test it on 17, test it on 16, so that's your kind of safe harbor. Probably works at 15 to 15, probably works 14 to 14, probably works 13 to 13. Stay away from 12 because there was some under the hood indexing change. But clients with 13 and up, as long as you're going, what'd you say, as long as you're going, well, most of the time I would be going from the same file format, like 13 to 13. And that, I think you said that that's probably safe, but don't do 12.
Yeah, as long as you're staying in the same version number or going forward, 13 and always going to a newer version.
But still stay away. I don't have any clients on 12, so I don't really care, but I think you said stay away from 12.
12 works. I mean, there's issues with the dependency tree and stuff like that. My recommendation is just stay
I
away
don't
from
like
12. So.
And to reiterate Clay's point, a good rule of thumb, and I'd love to hear QA's input if you want to elaborate, is once you begin editing an existing solution in a newer version of FileMaker Pro Advanced, for example, avoid the temptation to go backwards. In the new development environment, you'll want it in sync with all the clients to the best of your ability. We understand there's limitations there, but once you start using FileMaker 17, for example, you'll be, as a best practice, have all your clients on FileMaker 17 as well. All right, the next topic we're going to talk about is database schema performance and best practices. A question we get a lot, and I'm going to look to Clay to answer this question, is does the number of paths in relationship graph have an impact on the performance of a single file solution?
I'm going to bring up the ghost of John Thatcher here, I think, because I'm reading from his slides from 2009 for relationship path quantity. Does the quantity of relationship paths affect record creation, deletion, quantity of data downloading, or possible index and join result caches? And his answer was, the total quantity of paths in relationship graphs can't impact any of the above except for the number of join result caches, and only if you create and use duplicate relationships. And my talk on Tuesday, I was talking about how we cache all the intermediate results and stuff like that. So as you keep going deeper and deeper, as you're using more of the graph, we're going to be caching more and more stuff, pushing stuff into the file more often. But just the existence of the graph doesn't cause a performance problem in general usage until we get to page 2 here. Does the quantity relationship paths affect ... Opening a file will be slower the more table occurrences there are due to the updating of the connections between the previously open databases and the new one. That is something true, and I think I talked about this 2 years ago when I gave that 7-step process of what files go through when they do the opening. And that is one of the big steps at the end, is that we do download the entire join graph, and we make a memory representation of the entire thing. And part of making the memory representation is going through and hooking up, seeing which tables belong to which files, which SQL data sources the back end, which files that may be on the host. It's generating information for all that stuff. And so opening new files that have large join graphs in it can be slower, the bigger it is. But once it's put all in memory, and once it's there, you'll only use the parts of memory that it's actually needing for that particular operation. If you are low on RAM, you may run into problems because even though we've loaded it all into memory, it may be larger than the amount of virtual memory that you actually have allocated to you, so you may start paging at that point. So if you're trying to run it on a 1 gig machine or something like that, you may run into problems with that. But if using, this should never really be a problem on a server because you should have at least 8 gig of RAM. Or we have what is our recommendation? 16? Oh, 8 is it? Okay, 8. I'd go with 16 personally, but we do have to fit that interior join graph in RAM. So if you're opening 50 files that have extremely large join graphs, each of those files are going to have different portions and graph like that. So the whole opening process, as you're opening other ones, we have to bring this stuff in. But once you have it all there, it should be up and running. A lot of times when you see people that have large join graphs and they're complaining about speed performances, they don't realize where they've put things on their layouts that are accessing related data. They say, well, I pulled all my fields off my, my layout and it's still slow. But they didn't know that they had calculations that were hooked into doing hiding and showing and stuff like that that were pulling to determine whether to show and hide stuff. There may be stuff stuck inside other objects that are underneath other objects. There's triggers and, there's a lot of places that a relationship can be put, and you don't necessarily see them all. That's why some of these tools that go through that decode the join graph and stuff like that, I think some of them go through and will point out all the different relational accesses that you have on a layout and stuff like that, and those type tools, which there may be some holes in it, but we're fixing that in the future releases of the new versions of the DDR to make sure that you get that these tools will have all the exact information in there and be able to generate better reports.
Great. Thanks to the ghost of John Thatcher. Are those slides that you referenced, Clay, publicly available by chance?
These are, no, the 2009, I think we only go back to 10.
Okay.
I think that are.
All right, I'll see what I can do.
Yeah, I have a whole bunch of them going back to 2006, though some of those older ones are really pretty much out of date. There's, the session I did on Tuesday was based off the 2006 one, but there was a whole section in that one that was talking about features that no longer exist. We had these other file maintenance methods and calls that have been deleted since then, so. And some of them need a little bit of cleanup, but that may be useful. Well, they're also, a lot of them are like in PowerPoint and other. Some of these files don't open properly either anymore. I'm gonna have to find an old machine to be able to read these presentations.
Our next question revolves around execute SQL. We get a lot of excitement in this area, and one of the scenarios that has played out for a developer is there's instances where it's faster to download an entire table's worth of data through execute SQL than it is trying to do a simple where clause with an indexed field. So the author of this question was Chris Grew. If he happens to be in the audience, we could ask him to elaborate this particular scenario. But what I wanted to ask the panel are, what are some best practices with the execute SQL command, and what kind of expectations should developers have?
So actually, the execute SQL it's not pure the SQL engine. So this is the SQL framework is on top of the Draco. So some operations slow things down. It's compared to the Draco, the pure operation. So my recommendation is that if the operation can be done by the FileMaker, pure operating, I recommend that use the FileMaker, the sorting or find to do the same operation. But actually, I really love the execute SQL function. I use a lot in on my solution, but I think it's slowing things down. If the founders is huge, there's some optimization I think we need in our development team. Do you see any optimization we can do on this function today?
I mean, Oracle has a team of 100 people doing, SQL optimizations, and our development side team, I think, would fit easily inside that
We
group.
have Clay, though. It's equivalent to 100 developers.
Yeah, really, it would have been nice to find out what actual operation that the SQL was doing faster than the Pro side. I mean, conceivably, there's a bunch of things that are a lot easier. I mean, you don't have to, it's ad hoc querying. And the FileMaker database engine is basically, the whole design philosophy is pretty much different. It's you design the plan of how all the relationships are and stuff like that beforehand, which is kind of opposite from the SQL side.
Are you John by chance?
No.
Oh, okay. You got to execute
But
SQL?
this comes up in the forums quite a bit. Okay. Somebody recently suggested that execute SQL queries are done where? In the client or in the server? And why is the first time we use execute SQL slower than the others, than the subsequent ones? Because the person is complaining that it's 5 seconds is way too slow for the first query that happens less than a second the future ones. That's not me, that's somebody else. All
Well,
right?
yeah, it's, yeah. Well,
I'm sure we know who that is.
yeah. Well, the first part of the question is, it is done locally on the client.
It is done on-
We never send the SQL to the host.
Okay?
The FQL adapter that converts the SQL to the Draco commands is done on the client.
Okay.
One reason why it's faster when you do it the second time is because the first time you did it, for a lot of SQL operators, we need almost all the contents of the data to do hard scans ourselves across it if we can't use the index. Okay. So at that point, all the data has been downloaded into the temporary file in the cache. And once it's in the temporary file, if you do another SQL statement, we don't have to pull anything from the server at that time. We may not even talk to the server at all to do the execute SQL statement the second time, because all the data we need is setting in the temp file that we have locally.
So the more records that I want to query off of, the slower it's going to be because it has to pull it all down into the temporary file. The more records I have to query into, right?
Yes, it depends how well we were able to optimize it and ask for only particular record. It depends whether we had to do the hard scan on the data to match the type of SQL query that you're doing.
Okay.
If we could map the SQL query into something that FileMaker does exactly, then we don't need to pull down the data at that point. Or we can send the query to the host to do the FileMaker portion of it, and then hopefully just get the subset of that and then cut it down with the hard scan on it.
All right, thanks.
Great, thanks for the question. Yes?
Yeah, I've noticed that whenever I have an uncommitted record, that really slows down the execute SQL. Is there a reason behind that? And it's just a best practice. You just need to make sure you commit your records before you.
Well, it'll actually slow down the FileMaker calculation engine too. It's just not as observable. I mean, if you actually do the timing and stuff like that, having an active record open. The problem is when FileMaker does evaluations, this is one of the FileMaker isms, I guess, that we have, is that we always fetch the latest data, what the user is actually typing. And there's not many SQL engines don't go through and pull the text off your screen to put in part of their query and stuff like that. But we actually do that. That's our model that we have. So when you're clicked into a record, a hook has been added to the chain of the session, so that whenever you do fetching of certain data, if something down inside Draco says, "Oh, I need to fetch this data," and they'll see that, oh, this data happens to be in a value that's being edited by the OS for some reason. So then it has to make a path all the way through the OS to get the contents of that screen, the contents of that, and that's not cached because we don't know when it's going to change or anything like that. Right. So that process, unfortunately, because of all the emulation layers, you're going through the SQL to go down, make the Draco, then come back up, and then go back down and return stuff. Right. That path is a lot longer and slows things down than the same thing is happening with the calc engine too. It's just that it's so much higher and it doesn't have to go through that extra multiple layers of the SQL stuff and that doesn't slow it down nearly as much.
Gotcha. Thanks.
And a follow-up, sure.
It would be great if Execute SQL could give you a found set of records back rather than the data itself. Do you have anything in the works for that?
That's been a common request of having some type of, I don't know where I talked about that earlier this week. There's so many discussions. But it sounds like we need something like a found set representation of some sort, of being able to store it. I mean, people have been doing it right now with just a list of values of either primary keys or record IDs, and they have long lists and stuff like that. The problem is that when you just have text space like that, that's that long, if you have long or large found sets or record sets and stuff like that, the text engine on especially 32-bit machines can only handle, maybe a 200 meg. What was that bug that we were finding? We were running out around 200 megabytes is about as much text as you can put into a text field on a 32-byte.
I'd believe it, yeah.
Yeah, somewhere around there. So you wouldn't be able to have a found set larger than that if it's using, actual textual characters to represent all the rows. So we would have to come up with some other type scheme, and I've been talking to some of the developers around here, maybe we need to have some type of bitmap. So it actually would be a container field of a, just a black and white bitmap with dots that represent, which records they are, something that can be packed a lot tighter, that we can move around the database engine. So you'd have this, we would have new calc functions saying, save found set, and you'd end up with an image, or maybe it would be text, maybe base 65,000, something that we can store more, easier in a text field that wouldn't eat up so much space. But those are things that, we've been kind of thinking about, but I can't get any guarantees of when we would do something like that, and unless we can come up with some other great idea that, is better than, these two different hacks that well, maybe they're not hacks, but schemes to do something like that.
Thanks for letting us peer into your brain, Clay. That was very insightful. All right. Yes, another question?
Are we still on execute SQL, or could I go for a web viewer question?
Save the web viewer thoughts. I want to keep to what was presented on the forums, and we're about halfway there, and then we'll open it up to discussion. Thanks for asking.
Related to what you were just saying, you mentioned hard scan, and you mentioned it earlier today. I just wanted to, I think I know what you mean by that, but can you just clarify what you mean by hard scan?
That means basically download the record and look at the contents. And so at that point, if the client is doing it, they're pulling in, as we've talked about in previous sessions and stuff like that, whenever we fetch a row, we fetch the entire row all the time. So in previous performance discussions we've had where we talk about making skinny tables and stuff like that, so each row doesn't come down. But there's a bunch of different terms like this depending on which world of the computing science you're in, but I tend to call it hard scan. But that means we're doing the hard work of just, we have to look at the data, we have to pull the data into the buffer, and then we have to do a position or equal, or depending whatever the type operator, or less than, and do that comparison. We can't cheat and do other things by using pre-cached bitmaps, or by doing scans of the index, or other things that can speed up the search process.
Okay, cool.
Thank you.
Great. Sure. Execute SQL, always a fascinating topic. Switching gears, we're going to go into FileMaker Pro Advanced behavior. The question here is, what are the exact rules about when hidden files get opened when they are not referred to in any script so far run and not used in any data displayed or calculated fields?
Okay. I guess I can do this too.
Thanks, Clay.
So I talked about how that join graph has been made in memory and stuff like that. So there's pointers to the data, what is it called? The references, the file references that you have.
The file user?
No, the schema, the manage file references, or data sources, external data sources. Okay, I've had so many different versions of that name over the years. When you've worked on the same product this many years, you say, wait, which year is it now? Yeah, the external data sources. I think that's the current name for it. So that join graph has these pointers to these external data sources. And the minute that we have to go through that, you need to fetch something, we need a record or a row or something like that. We go through that big memory graph that's in memory, and we'll go down there and say, okay, it's down in here in this file. Oh, if this file is not open, we need to open it. And the minute that reference is hit, then it's opened. And remember that point when we get to another question. We open it, and then we tend to open it in this hidden state. So Windows tend to have like three states. They have where the Windows instantiated and visible, the Windows instantiated and hidden, or there is no, in the user model, what we call or a window, even a virtual window associated with it. It's a raw DB file user, that's the internal terminology for it. But the representation of a particular file with a particular user, but it has no window on it. And that's what the three different states on it. And if it hits something in that join graph and it doesn't require a window, the file is opened and left in that latter state, and it's hooked in and open at that time. Yeah, I think that's pretty much how it works. Yeah, how they open. Now, there's a few other things that can trigger, like scripts can trigger opening it up and opening windows.
So any the window name appear with a bracket, that's only with the DB file object. there's no the window associated with it. So anytime you run the script, it's required that the window object. That's the time actually we create the actual window, and then the bracket goes away. That's happening.
What about any involvement with the script debugger in this particular case?
Yes, script debugger when you so any there's a file reference to it to the other external file. Yes, we does open with a bracket state.
Okay.
But when you start running, it does require the window object, and then it's become without the bracket state.
Sure. Thanks, Masao. Next question regarding FileMaker behavior. Are there any technical reasons why it would not be possible to change a path variable by unloading one data set and connecting to another during runtime? You jumping in there, Clay? All right.
Yeah, I think that's what I was mentioning. Remember this for for another question. That's
Perfect
this
segue.
question. So, yeah, I believe this is talking about people wanting to be able to change a variable for an external data source. And the thing is that once it's been hooked into that graph, once it's been open and it's no longer just a pointer to the external data source, and it's been instantiated in memory, pretty much we have no mechanism to go through to be able to replace that with another file. Because once it gets hooked in there, then its join graph gets hooked to the join graph that is already in existence, and there's just too many linkages for us to back out. We've tried doing it, but things get so buggy at that state that we've given up trying to resolve that in that direction. Maybe I'll switch to another file, but yeah, no. Once it's been resolved, it's pretty much open until all references to it are closed. So once the outermost join graph gets closed, now you can get the windows off. When you close all the windows, then it goes back to that state where it's just, there's no virtual windows, no real windows associated with it. And then once all references to it, once that join graph that's hooked into the other one goes away, then that can go away, and then things can slowly start collapsing down and closing everything at that point.
Follow-up question?
Well, is that related at all to the communication with hosts was interrupted scenario, and you trying to reestablish a connection can never work? Is that?
Is this during a reconnect phase when you come back to the Pro application and it is unsuccessfully able to reconnect when the dialog's up?
Just if there's been a network outage or something has happened that's broken the connection to the hosted file, nothing will work from that point on to try to reconnect, is my experience. And is that related to what you're talking about file references being resolved once? And
well, it used to be if you had any type of network error, we would just shut everything down and close everything and delete everything in memory. Now these files that are hooked into that join graph that I'm talking about, they go into this dead state basically and keep trying to reconnect until you hit the cancel button. And so we don't replace it with anything else. Underneath it may be being replaced with a different network connection underneath it, but the actual representation and all the stored state information about it is still being held in memory at that point. But if the reconnect is successful, everything should just come back to life at that point. But we actually haven't moved around and swapped out what file it's talking to. We've actually gone through and reopened up a different network pipe underneath it, but it still represents the same file.
thank you.
Okay. Masao thought about
Quick
it.
follow-up. Hold on.
Yeah, please.
So has that changed? Because like in FileMaker 11, 12, 13, it seems like if you have a local file open that relies on a hosted file, and if there's a network connection issue and you get the message that says communication has been lost, all you get is a button that says OK. And once you click OK, you can't access that hosted file anymore. You have to close down your local database and open it back up for it to reestablish that. Has that changed in 17?
That changed with FileMaker 14. We introduced the reconnect feature, which we
With the mobile, right?
What's that?
With mobile.
Are you talking about FileMaker Go?
No.
Okay, yeah, with FileMaker Pro Advanced or Pro back then, yeah, 14 introduced the reconnect feature.
So the FileMaker 14, we introduced a reconnect feature, which is when you disconnect from the host file, we try to reconnect the file, the same file, and once the file is back up, and then we try to reconnect. And if the file is not available, in the 15, you get a model, the dialog said, we are reconnecting the file. You want to force reconnect or you cancel. So that means once you cancel it, the other file is closing down. But when you try to force reconnect, we try to reconnect, and then if the file is not available, we force shut down the file. But you can still wait. And then we introduce the modal reconnect in model-less reconnect in the 17, I think. And then now we are just waiting the reconnect is happen. And then there's a way to only closing the file down is clicking the cancel button. That's why we introduced that version 17.
Yeah, in version 17, you'll notice it's a window modal dialog instead of an application modal dialog when you're in the reconnect phase.
Also, I think Albert tried to make it so it didn't actually have to close down the local file, or he was tweaking things in there to try to make it work better, to minimize the amount of stuff if one host goes down, that it doesn't bring down more stuff. It was getting a little bit aggressive on the number of files it needs to shut down. But one of our engineers that was doing most of this work was going through and trying to reduce try to minimize the number of files that have to be closed because a disconnection happened.
All right, now we're going to focus our attention to FileMaker Server. This is going to go to James or Emmy, give Clay a break. All right. What is the best way to load test a FileMaker Server deployment to see what its maximum capacity is? And you may be able to answer this also by giving some insight into how we do it internally.
Yeah, so this is kind of a loaded question because it really depends on the solution that you have. We found internally, and I'm sure I've brought cases to Emmy, and he's just been like, "Whoa, what are you doing?" Right? So, so it really depends on the solution you have. So I'm going to give some insight in how we do it, and then how we isolate problem areas and solutions. I know the question references the 4 common bottlenecks, but there are several bottlenecks you can find before you even are ever CPU bound or IO bound or any sort of things like that. So basically what we do is we like to use the REST API recently because JMeter is awesome and it's easy to build a load test. So we want to start with a solution, right? And we want to think about how users use that solution. And we think about what the common path for a user is. What are they doing? Okay, they're creating an invoice, reading an invoice, deleting an invoice, or deleting a customer, editing a customer, these sorts of things. So we think about the path, and then we mimic that path. And what we typically do is we put a series of think time in between each action. And what we like to do is between 3 and 30 seconds. So between 3 to 30 seconds, be a randomized think value between actions. So I would have something like, I come in, I create a customer, I pause for a random amount of time. It'll be between 3 and 30 seconds. Because you don't really know what your users are going to pause for, right? And typically a user takes about 3 to 30 seconds, or some take longer. We're not typically just running through things. So in the solution. So once we've got our flow, and then we've got our thinks and these sorts of things, we go ahead and we do a increasing load. So we do maybe one user every 30 seconds or every minute. Sometimes we do it every second, but it's better to do it gradually because then you can really see when you start to hit your bottlenecks. So we'll push it up and we'll see where our bottleneck is. Oftentimes we find that it's solution dependent. For instance, we had an example maybe a year ago where we had a value list that had 30,000 values in it. And hey, people do it, right? So we actually used it to benchmark the 100 clients on WebDirect a long time ago with 30,000 values inside of there. So we found that by the top call stats. So we looked at top call stats and we converted that into seconds and we go, oh, wait, this value list is actually where this particular server's hanging at. And we went ahead and looked at it and said, well, do we really need 30,000 values in there? And no, probably not. And then all of a sudden, we're on to the next bottleneck, right? So you find the next bottleneck, and then, okay, well, so the solution's optimized now. now I'm CPU bound, right? Or now I'm disk bound, right? But I think you'll find that unless if you're on modern disk hardware, modern hardware, you're not really going to see a lot of I/O bound or a lot of CPU bound and stuff like that. You'll really see some heavy stuff if you're doing like unstored calculations, or you've got big large value lists, or you've got a bunch of server-side scripts on the back end doing crazy things, right? So it's really kind of solution-based and time to time. I think another way we do this is we do it through the script engine also. Sorry guys, I don't like installing Pro for like 500 clients, so I tend to use the script engine. And there's a developer-made tool, DS Benchmark, is kind of similar to what we do, but we use the script engine to simulate load. And we'll go through a FileMaker layout and step through it just as a user would, and we'll spin off 500 threads doing this and see where our bottleneck is. So
thanks for sharing, James.
So follow up. That was my question as well. So the motivation for the question, you mentioned a tool and it slipped. Was that the thing from Nick Lightbodies?
Oh yeah, DS Benchmark. Yeah, I think Nick Lightbody. I'm not quite sure. I'm familiar with it. I've been into it. I looked at it and sort of things.
Yeah,
but yeah.
If I may riff with you, his assertion was that the server works great until it doesn't. Based on the amount of hardware you have for a given deployment. The analogy that I have in my mind is of a water tank where you're getting load from hopefully a very well-designed solution. And at some point, the processing power that's draining the water is not able to keep up with the amount of water that's being poured in. That's the visual metaphor that I have in my mind. And that's what Nick said. So you blame him if that's wrong. So what I was thinking, and I spent a lot of time looking at the stats, and the top call stats that showed up in 15 is awesome. And most of my solutions are pretty well designed, so design your solutions better. Design, and do all that on the work. But then again, sometimes we have the situation we have a client with 200 tables, and everything's fine. And if Nick is right that everything runs great until it doesn't, the water's going in and the water's going out, and it's not overflowing. But at some point, the only way that I can see to test it is if you somehow find some methodology to measure the water flow. And I've looked at all the stats extensively, all of them. And so the Lightbody tools seem really, really good for load testing. And I just wondered if there was anything else out there.
Sure, and in practice it seems that simple, but in reality it's really not. Oftentimes you'll see clusters of virtual machines, and they're all sharing a SAN, and they'll have performance issues at a certain time during the day because all these VMs are sharing a pipe, and that's when you become I/O bound. So I'm specifically saying that we have, in our testing, we have dedicated hardware and we don't have variables like that. But in the real world, you can't really depend on a tool. You have to think about the environment and what are your extra factors. Because if you do a benchmark where you're doing disk I/O benchmark, well, is that going to be the same during peak hours as it is when I'm doing it now?
I'm with you. It's a complicated topic, and there's multiple variables that are all interacting. And for this particular solution, which is now running great, which is possibly we're going to upgrade. We are going to probably, run some top call and, over the various time cycles that impact daily, hourly, weekly, seasonal. So I thought that was.
Are you using Windows?
This particular solution is on a Macintosh. I'll tell the truth, it's on an Xserve 3.1, I believe, or maybe it's a 5.1.
Okay, so you might be disk bound, yeah.
Well, actually, we're working with an Apple network consultant, and we did some pretty extensive analysis of the, underlying, and, he's certified by Apple. And anyway, it's running good. I like the answer. It's a complicated topic.
And you're free to find me after, and we can chat it up. So this is what we do. So
yeah, talk more.
Thanks for sharing, James. And with that, with 20 minutes left, I'm going to open it up to the floor. So I want to make sure we had a queued up web viewer question. So we'll let that one go first. And feel free to come to us with any WebDirect questions. Melody's getting bored over there. So I'll start left and then I'll jump right.
All right. Well, forgive me if this kind of falls into more of a feature request or broken record category, but the ability to modify the web viewer so that we can execute FileMaker scripts to trigger behaviors in JavaScript, round tripping data in the web viewer. So right now there's workarounds for that, but and the FMP URL gave us one direction, sort of, but like to be able to have a FileMaker scripting to JavaScripting bidirectional workflow.
And I'll take this question. It came up in the fireside chat yesterday, and we discussed it, and I'll repeat a little bit of it here. This is something we're very much interested in. The essentials is that through JavaScript, the web page you have loaded in the web viewer would have a hook to be able to call FileMaker scripts or more interaction in both directions, as you described. Right. So this is something very interesting to us, and we're looking at it very closely.
Oh, that's awesome. And then I mean, the other thing would be the web viewer does give us a JavaScript engine, but it requires, it's a layout object, so if there was a way to be able to have like a headless, you know, way to run JavaScript, it would be pretty neat too.
Yeah, definitely. Agreed.
Watching the new import manager situation, I was wondering what's the oldest code in FileMaker? Still live.
Well, I just code reviewed some of Clay's code that was from 1999, but its origin was way before that because it had been converted to C++, probably from Pascal, if I had to guess. Probably. So what do you think the oldest is, Clay?
Actually, that code actually isn't too bad. I think drag and drop is probably the ugliest part and the oldest part that's in the code, in the client UI. That and some of the clipboard support too. That's some of the most ancient code. It's still using the concept of Macintosh handles, if anyone knows what that is. We have this class called xhandle, which is our implementation of a Macintosh handle.
Is it like so we can keep System 7 or something?
Yeah. You have to remember Draco was designed before Mac OS 10 even came out. So we could actually run, well, probably not anymore, but for a while there, the Draco engine could run in a cooperative threaded operating system as opposed to a preemptive threaded operating system. But yeah, no, there's some ancient stuff in there, but
cool.
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
2 questions, hopefully. So we have Git as CSS, Git as SVG. We have ways of getting formatted data out of a field and get it tagged so that we can pass it to something else. What about taking something that's already tagged and putting it back into a field with the formatting without doing it through a custom function? So colors, fonts, text, sizes, subscript, superscript.
Yes, stay tuned. What I want to mention briefly is what we got from the keynote. The ability to read and write is an important concept to us, and so we want you to be able to accomplish that goal in the near future. Yes.
Yeah, with JSON we can get that data out, but putting it back in, it's going to mangle it. So that's why I still have a lot of set fields that reference fields that have that formatted data. Okay, good. So evaluate function, I love it. I use it a lot. What's the ramifications of using evaluate in every single calculation inside the field definitions?
I'll defer to my calculation expert on the panel. That's you, Clay.
Yeah. I say, oh, who is it? If you don't mind the performance of it, I mean,
is there a performance hit to use evaluate instead of just typing in the calculation into that field definition of using evaluate?
Because evaluate means every time it's executed, it actually has to parse it. So it has to go through, look at the text, parse it into its object code. And then actually a calculation is stored as 2 different streams. I guess it's turning it into under the hood talk, but one stream is kind of the textual representation that's tokenized. So we're generating that. So evaluate's going through and doing all this stuff. And then it creates another reverse Polish notation, which is the actual execution path. And then it generates that thing. So every time you're calling evaluate, it's generating these 2 streams, and then it goes through, then it'll evaluate it and execute the reverse Polish one, and they'll throw everything away. And that can actually be pretty quick, but as machines gets faster. But I mean, if you have the CPU power to do it, more power to you, I guess. But it's not the fastest way to do it. But I mean, when you're dealing with UI issues, there's some people just clicking things on it. Computers are fast enough; you can waste a lot of time. Just look at browsers. What happened? They're really over bloated, and the amount of code that you do. If you're dealing with stuff at just the user interaction time frame, you can get away with a lot, but you definitely won't want to do that in scripting if you're trying to run over and generate your values from your summaries and cache them and stuff like that. You'll definitely want to stick with real scripts that are real calculations that are stored.
Okay, good. Thanks.
Actually, outside of the performance, there is also, this is something we attempt not to do, but it happened in the past where we would eventually rename a function. When that happened, the evaluate eventually would suddenly break because this is a text that is trying to evaluate. So,
good point. Yes?
I'll ask a WebDirect question. There you go. Wake up there. Do you see a day when FileMaker Client and FileMaker WebDirect have so little differences between them that it's astounding that we can use both? And if you don't, what feature right now, what difference right now will stay different forever and ever and ever? If you can kind of predict that.
So I think what people need to realize is the web environment is a lot different from the Pro and Go clients, right? So Pro and Go, it's got its own Draco engine sitting on the same machine that you're running the client, versus for the web, right now we're using the Draco engine, but that's sitting on a server. And for us to port all that over into the client, it's going to be a lot of work. And in terms of parity, there's also web limitations. So a lot of the bugs that come, we've had to defer it just because, or we had to mark it as technical limitation. But in terms of the limitation, it's not a true limitation in the sense of that's a limitation, but it's more of the fact that browsers and web applications don't work the same as desktop clients. So I don't see a day where it's going to be completely the same, but definitely, what was your second part?
Well, which feature would stay different all the way? I'm thinking of the FMP protocol. I love working with the web viewer. That one thing kills us from being able to use JavaScript amazingly in all parts of the platform, even though it is native FileMaker, blah, 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 blah. Can you speak to that specifically? Is there any possibility?
So we did take a look at that on the WebDirect side, but the way it would work would be different from how you guys might. It wouldn't be completely calling a FMP URL, but instead we would have to build something more natively for the web viewer inside WebDirect to talk to the rest of the solution. So that is something we did look into, and there's ways to post message and talk between the iframes and the parent window. So there are ways that are different from the way that Pro and Go would implement those type of functionality.
Cool. Thank you.
Thanks. Yes.
Well, as it happens, this leads exactly onto my question. I think we all understand that the different platforms or versions of FileMaker that we use have differences. But I get very frustrated when I can't find them documented anywhere. It's all very well having a list of functions, a list of script steps, and say, this one works here, this one works here. But it's very frustrating when you're designing a layout and you set it to center vertically, and you find on web, this might be IWP, I'll just say that, but in the past, you'd find that it couldn't center vertically. But nowhere was that written down. And it was impossible to, in the end, we have to try everything. Well, that's not the way to develop stuff, because we have something in our head. We can get it working in Pro, but when we go and look at it on Go or on WebDirect, it doesn't look the same.
I can take this one if you want it. You jump. You go.
So sometimes it's just a bug. And I would say just get it to us, report it, and see what happens there. Because
many times it's not. Look, I think that what I'm trying to say is it's understood that they're never going to be the same from the previous question. So there's always going to be differences between Pro, Go, WebDirect. but there doesn't seem to be a way of providing us with that information unless it's about scripts or functions.
Right. So it could be a scenario where that it may be something we might be unaware of, and that's why it's not there. But you know, FileMaker is like our children. We love it, right? Just don't. If you see something like that, don't accept it as the way it is. Report it to us. Put it on the forums. And I'd like to echo this. If you guys have issues or things, put on the forums because we read the forums. We really do. We read the forums and we see it and we hear. So those sort of things, you know, be vocal about it.
But you're not giving me the information for me to be able to go and look and say, oh, look, it says it should work.
So let me jump in there. This is an area we do spend a lot of time and energy in. We work very closely with our technical writers as we develop features to fill their heads and get their input. So if you're missing an area, do report it because we want to solve this problem and we want to give you the tools you need, the information you need to be successful. So it's sounding to me like we have a blind spot in a particular area, and we're more than happy to address it. Yeah.
Okay.
So I just want to expand that. We do try to work towards parity between all the clients, and that was something that WebDirect, that we were trying to do with WebDirect. And in the first few releases, there was a lot of bugs and differences that we knew about. And I think for the most part, we try really hard to list all those in the WebDirect guide. And if you go read the WebDirect guide, there's a lot of different, it doesn't work like this, watch out for this. And so there's a lot of those as much as we know, right?
But what I'm trying to say is that's in one place. But we have Go, and we have other things, and I'd like to think someone had the idea of putting all these things together so that if we say we want to have a window full screen, there's somewhere that we can go and refer to that where it says, oh, that'll work in Pro, and in Go, whatever. You understand me? It actually helps differentiate what's going to happen when you try these different things on different
Sure, let me
clients.
talk to you a little bit after this and get some more insight, because like I said, we are very interested.
Someone just whispered in my ear.
Oh, that's cheating.
No,
Okay,
because I've spoken to, I've forgotten your name now, James today. It also comes to the thing when you go through the function list or the script steps. I was talking to you about input records, and it says partially supported.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's not really good enough because it isn't telling us why it doesn't work or what doesn't work.
Let me again talk to you afterwards because it should.
Yeah.
Yes.
Do you see a point where FileMaker server is ever going to be able to support clustering with high availability and load balancing?
Yes, a question for Emmy.
Currently, yes, we have a load balancer, native load balancer that I took the session in the morning. We have it. If you don't want, you can put your own load balancer also. There is a way to disable our own load balancer and you can put your third-party load balancer over there. Clustering part, we still need to think about because that it's a bit complex by nature. We need to find out the way how to achieve it.
So it is on the roadmap, though, or
Yep.
something being investigated.
Yep.
Excellent. Thank you.
Great. And to the left.
Okay, this is also a WebDirect question. We have a timesheet entry that is running on the web. We have a long list of timesheet entries that the people in the field need to fill in. And what's happening is once you scroll past the first screen of records, when they go in to enter data in a particular timesheet record, it is not always predictably jumping back up to the top of the list after they finish an entry. Is that a limitation of the web technologies, or is that a bug that needs to be reported and hopefully fixed?
So that's a complicated bug, right? So these are the issue with the scrolling and going back to not the proper places. We've seen a bunch of bugs about that, and it's going to take us a lot more work to fix it. But it is definitely not expected behavior, and we're going to have to spend some time thinking about how to make that whole scrolling and jumping to different records better.
Yeah, I've noticed two things that can be a major effect on that are having it keep in sorted order set on the layout seems to trigger that much more often, and having a sub-summary where it's grouping records also seems to trigger that more often.
Yeah, so I mean, what's behind it is basically we're using our Avadan technology, which provides us with the portal, the table, and the list view, which is using the Avadan table. And because of that, we have to work around some of the ways that they expect things to be, and then we have to try to hook into their code in certain parts, and that's where the complexity comes in.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Yes.
I'm not sure if it's a server or a client issue, but what happens when you hit cancel on a very long sort or a find, and what is it doing that it just doesn't stop instantly?
So I heard the exact same question in Clay's first session today, yesterday rather. Do you want to repeat it? You want me to repeat what I heard? Give you a break?
Oh, well, yeah. Well, no.
All right.
Okay. This is a feature that has been on the list for some time to be able to cancel remote operations. Basically, whenever you see the cancel button on the client side, it'll cancel as much of the local operation, but then when it hits the remote operation, if you catch and hit the cancel button before the remote operation gets triggered, it will stop at that point. But right now, actually, in the same slide deck I was talking about from 2009, it mentions the same exact thing. So, yeah, currently there isn't a mechanism to stop the Draco remote calls that are going back and forth.
So we have 4 minutes left, so I think these last 3 questions should be able to fit in.
So we already have, like, within the calculation engine or scripting, we can set up our own timing and try to optimize things the best we can. Is there any tools that you use in testing or any ways that we can do as for layouts to try to narrow down what is slowing things down or how to optimize that the best? I mean, I'd love to see something like you see on web pages where it has kind of load times and what is taking a larger piece of the load time, window.
So for me, for myself, and Masal can follow up, but typically when we have a complex layout that we're having performance issues, I take a sort of a brute force approach and I will delete half the objects on it.
Yeah,
and I will benchmark, and then I'll re-add, and I'll do sort of a search that way to find out where it is and what's slowing down. On the performance side for the browsers, we look for the objects and how they load. We use Selenium to test when they actually respond and they load. And the browser's a little bit easier to debug than the Pro client. But these guys are Pro experts, so maybe they have a better way of doing it.
Well, actually we do same thing as what the James doing. Also, we use some profile tool that comes with the Xcode to see how much the functions loaded to see we find the exact point where the bottleneck is and report it back to the developer. That's how we are doing.
I have one more thing to add to that. If you upload the file to server and you turn on top call stats, it will tell you what is taking the longest on that layout.
Okay.
Yeah, so that if you haven't used that, if you want to look for performance issues, it really is handy. So it once you start to learn and see it. So
great, thanks. Yes.
What causes the find in progress dialog box to appear when you're not doing a find, and how do you troubleshoot it?
It pretty much comes up anytime any query or find. So a relational reference that needs to be performed, it'll pop up for that too. So you may have a calc that's saying, oh, make this object visible or invisible on the layout. And if it's based on a relationship, it's considering that a find operation to resolve the relationship to get the value to generate the Boolean value to determine whether to show or hide the object. So it's kind of misnamed. It really should be more like find or join operation in progress.
But this is something that seems to have appeared only since FileMaker 15. Since the inline portal progress kind of feature was put in, or it doesn't happen in 13, but ever since 15 and on, it's much more prevalent.
So yeah, follow up with me because you may have uncovered a bug, and I'd like to hear more.
I'd like to say thank you for the layout objects dialogue that we now have, so that we have that. However, I have a layout with a large solution.
We're out of time.
However, I have a layout that has 49 portals on it, and each portal has probably, I don't know, 15 or 20 items on it. It works great. The solution works fantastic, and it uses the old drag and drop, and it's beautiful. Very easy for my customers to use. However, when I need to go in and change something, it is an absolute nightmare, even with the layout objects now, because things are repeated, across the whole thing. And I remember back to the days of PageMaker and some of the graphics programs where you could hold down the command key and click, and it would select the next object below. Is there any way of getting that kind of a thing implemented? Because it still is really difficult, with that kind of a complex layout. Even with layout objects, it's impossible to get a hold of something. What I end up doing is moving stuff out of the way to get to the one I need.
With the layout object menu, there's the right-click option to hide all other objects, right?
Yes.
Does that kind of help, or when you
Not
said down
really.
below, do you mean you have like a group and you're looking to just dive deeper and deeper?
It's not actually grouped. It's just
on
just
top of
things
each other.
Things stacked on top of each other.
So the workflow we had in mind was you'd use the object tree as you described. You'd right-click that object, say hide all occluding objects, and then you'd have it focused on your layout. But it sounds like that's not quite accomplishing.
I believe I've done that right when it first came out,
Okay.
and it didn't do the trick. But the most simple thing would be some kind of a modifier key, and just click, 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 and it would just go and select it. Because a lot of times I just have to tweak it over a little or something, and it becomes a nightmare. Well, but they're repeated items. Each of these 49 portals has the same name of the items. So it's
you can't select an object inside the
sometimes
portal.
there's the bring to front, send to back, and so now one that's here is at a higher level than one that's over here. I mean, it would be so simple just to go click, 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 click.
Yep, we'll look into that for sure. A great idea. We're
Thank
all
you.
out of time,
Appreciate
so feel
it.
free to talk to me now. And I wanted to follow up with the documentation question. So that's the end of our session. Thank you very much to our developer panel. Thank you for your questions and your participation. And enjoy the party.